My name is Desmond Grant. I am 47 years old, and I've worked as a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park in southern Oregon for 21 years, specializing in winter operations when the park receives over 40 feet of snow and most facilities are closed to the public. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, please. Crater Lake sits at nearly 6,000 feet elevation in the Oregon Cascades. Formed in the caldera of the collapsed volcano Mount Mazama, the lake is the deepest in the United States at 1943 feet. And during winter, the park becomes one of the snowiest places in North America, with snowpack routinely exceeding 30 feet and temperatures dropping well below zero. This happened last February during a routine winter patrol when the park was closed to all vehicles except snowmobiles, and the only staff present were a skeleton crew maintaining essential operations. I was on a solo snowmobile patrol checking the Rim Road, a 33-mile loop that circles the crater, to assess avalanche conditions and ensure no unauthorized winter visitors were in dangerous areas. I left park headquarters around 8 a.m. on a clear, cold morning, temperature around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The snowpack was about 28 feet deep that year, with the rim road marked only by tall poles showing where the pavement was buried far below. Visibility was excellent, which is rare during Oregon winter, when storms usually dominate. I was about 12 miles into my patrol, on the east rim with spectacular views across the impossibly blue lake to the western cliffs, when my snowmobile's engine started running rough. I stopped to check it, about 100 yards from the rim edge where safety barriers were buried under 20 feet of snow. As I was examining the engine, I heard something that made me look up immediately. A sound like heavy breathing, rhythmic and deep, coming from the forest to my right, maybe 50 yards away. The sound was too loud and too deep to be human, but it had a quality that suggested a large chest cavity, something breathing deliberately. I scanned the trees with my binoculars. The forest at this elevation in winter is primarily mountain hemlock and subalpine fir, and visibility through the snow-laden branches is limited. I saw nothing, but the breathing sound continued, always from that same location, never moving. I got back on my snowmobile and tried to start it. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I tried repeatedly for maybe 5 minutes. Standard cold weather starting procedure, but it wouldn't fire. I radioed park dispatch to report I had a mechanical issue and might need a rescue snowmobile sent out. Dispatch acknowledged and said they'd send someone, but it would take at least 2 hours to reach my location. The breathing sound stopped, complete silence. Then I heard something that made my professional training and 21 years of winter experience tell me I was in a dangerous situation. Footsteps in the deep snow, heavy and deliberate, moving toward my position from the forest. Not the light footfalls of someone on snowshoes, but something breaking through the deep snowpack with each step, suggesting enormous weight. I abandoned my disabled snowmobile and started walking along the rim road toward where I knew another patrol might be. I was on snowshoes, standard winter equipment, but progress was slow, through snow that was over 20 feet deep in places, with only the road markers showing the route. The footsteps followed me. I could hear them, maybe 100 yards behind, maintaining that same distance, breaking through the snowpack with each heavy step. I walked for maybe 2 miles, and the sounds stayed with me the entire way, never getting closer, but never falling back. Around 11 a.m., I encountered another ranger on a snowmobile coming from the opposite direction on his routine patrol. I told him I had mechanical trouble and something was following me. We rode double back to my disabled machine. When we reached my snowmobile, we found tracks in the snow around it. Not animal tracks I could identify, not human tracks. Large impressions in the deep snow, barefoot prints showing in the compacted areas. Each print easily 17 or 18 inches long. The tracks circled my snowmobile, then led back toward the forest in the direction the footsteps had come from. My snowmobile started on the first try when the other ranger tried it. No mechanical problem at all, even though I'd tried repeatedly, and it wouldn't start for me. We took photographs of the tracks, then returned to headquarters. I filed a detailed incident report describing the breathing sounds, the snowmobile malfunction being followed, and the tracks we'd found. The official response was that I'd probably heard wind through trees creating unusual sounds, and the tracks were likely from a black bear. Even though bears are hibernating in February, and the tracks showed toes and foot structure, unlike any bear. But I talked to other winter rangers who work Crater Lake and other Cascade parks, people I've known for years. Several admitted privately they'd had strange experiences during winter operations in the most isolated areas. Sounds that don't match known wildlife, equipment malfunctions that resolve mysteriously, tracks in the snow that don't match any known species, the sense of being watched or followed in areas where humans are rarely present. Owen Ranger, with over 25 years at Crater Lake, told me about an experience in the 1990s. He was on a winter patrol and his snowmobile died in a remote area. While waiting for rescue, he heard something large moving in the forest nearby and found tracks similar to what I'd described. His snowmobile started perfectly when help arrived, with no mechanical explanation for the failure. The Klamath people, whose ancestral territory includes Crater Lake, which they call Giwas, have traditional knowledge about the mountain and the beings associated with it. According to their teachings, Crater Lake is a sacred site where powerful beings dwell, and they're particularly active during winter when few humans can access the area. The Klamath traditionally avoided the immediate vicinity of the crater during certain seasons out of respect and caution. I continue working winter operations at Crater Lake because I am one of the few rangers with the experience and training for this specialized work. But I am more cautious now during solo winter patrols, especially in the most remote sections of the Rim Road. When equipment fails mysteriously, when I hear sounds I can't identify, when I feel I am being followed, I trust those instincts and I don't investigate further alone. Crater Lake in winter is one of the most isolated and extreme environments in the national park system, with snowpack so deep that the landscape is completely transformed and access is severely limited. Perfect conditions for something that wants to avoid human contact during most of the year, but monitors the rare humans who venture into the winter landscape. And based on what I experienced and the tracks that were photographed in conversations with other winter rangers, something does inhabit the forests around Crater Lake during winter. Something that breathes deeply enough to be heard from distance. Something that can walk through 20-foot snowpack, leaving barefoot impressions. And something that made it clear through equipment, sabotage, and following that my presence wasn't entirely welcome in that remote section of the rim. My name is Leonard Pike. I am 52 years old, and I've worked as a backcountry ski patroller and avalanche forecaster in Oregon's Cascade Range for 28 years. Primarily in the Three Sisters Wilderness area, a vast expanse of volcanic peaks, glaciers, and old-growth forest. This happened last January during a multi-day backcountry ski patrol to assess snowpack stability and avalanche conditions in remote areas that see very few winter visitors. I was working with a partner, another experienced patroller, traveling on cross-country skis and camping in snow caves in an area near Broken Top Mountain, about 15 miles from the nearest plowed road. We'd been out for 3 days, digging snow pits to analyze layers, taking measurements, and documenting conditions for our avalanche forecast. On the evening of day 3, we'd built a snow cave for shelter at around 7,000 feet elevation in a basin below Broken Top's north face. Around 9 p.m., we were in our snow cave preparing dinner on our camp stove when we heard something outside that made us both stop what we were doing immediately. Vocalizations, not human, not any animal either of us recognized from combined 50-plus years in the Cascades. The sounds were complex, varying in pitch and rhythm, coming from somewhere on the slope above our snow cave. My partner and I went outside to investigate. The vocalizations continued, now clearly coming from multiple directions on the slopes around our position, as if we were surrounded by sources making these sounds in a coordinated pattern. The sounds echoed through the mountain basin in ways that made them difficult to pinpoint exactly. We scanned the slopes with our headlamps and couldn't see anything. The vocalizations continued for maybe 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Complete silence. Then we heard movement in the snow above us. Something large breaking through the snowpack, moving laterally across the slope, maybe 200 yards above our position. We tracked the movement with our lights, but couldn't see what was making it. Whatever it was traveling across extremely steep terrain, where skiing or snowshoeing would be challenging even for experts. And the movement suggested it was covering ground quickly through deep snow. The movement sounds circled our position, staying at roughly the same elevation, completing about a 180-degree arc around the basin we were in. Then silence again. We waited outside our snow cave, watching and listening, for maybe 30 minutes. Nothing more. We went back inside, but neither of us slept well that night. Around 3 a.m., we heard sounds again, this time closer. Something was moving right outside our snow cave, maybe 10 feet from where we were lying in our sleeping bags. We could hear snow being disturbed, deliberate sounds of something investigating our shelter. My partner called out, asking if anyone was there, thinking maybe another winter camper had found our cave. No response. The sounds continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. We stayed in the cave until first light, around 7 a.m. When we emerged, we found tracks in the snow around our cave. Large barefoot impressions, at least 16 or 17 inches long, with visible toe impressions. The tracks circled our snow cave completely, showing that whatever made them had investigated our shelter thoroughly during the night. The stride length suggested something very tall, possibly 8 feet based on the spacing between prints. We have photographed the tracks extensively, including measurements and our boots for scale. Then we made a decision to end our patrol early and ski out, even though we'd planned to stay 2 more days. Something about those tracks and the organized sounds from the night before made us both feel we should leave the area. We skied the 15 miles back to our vehicle, a challenging journey through deep powder, and reached the trailhead by late afternoon. We reported our findings to our supervisor, providing the photographs and detailed description of the vocalizations and tracks. The official response was that we'd probably encountered a mountain lion or other wildlife, and the tracks were difficult to identify definitively due to snow conditions. Our photographs were noted but not investigated further, but we talked to other backcountry professionals who work Oregon's Cascades, including ski patrollers, avalanche forecasters, and wilderness guides. Several admitted privately they'd had similar experiences in the most remote high-elevation areas. Vocalizations that don't match known species. Tracks in the snow that are far too large for human and wrong shape. For any known animal, the sense of being surrounded by coordinated positions. Zone avalanche forecaster told us about working in the Mount Jefferson wilderness in 2018. His team heard vocalizations similar to what we described, and found large tracks circling their snow camp. They cut their field work short and skied out early, same as we had. The indigenous peoples of Oregon, including the Malala and others who historically inhabited the Cascade region, have traditional knowledge about mountain beings who live in the high country, particularly around volcanic peaks. According to their teachings, these beings are most active during winter, when deep snow keeps most humans out of the mountains, and they're territorial about their high elevation domains. I continue backcountry avalanche work because it is essential for public safety, and it is my profession. But my partner and I discussed it extensively afterward, and we agreed we won't do winter field work in that particular area of the Three Sisters Wilderness anymore. We've modified our patrol routes to avoid that basin below Broken Top, even though it means less comprehensive data for our forecasts. The Three Sisters Wilderness contains over 280,000 acres of high-elevation terrain, much of it inaccessible during winter, except to expert backcountry travelers willing to ski 15 or 20 miles from the nearest road. Perfect habitat for something that wants to avoid humans. And based on those tracks we photographed and the coordinated vocalizations and conversations with other backcountry professionals, something does inhabit the remote high country of the Oregon Cascades. Something that moves easily through deep snow and steep terrain. Something that vocalizes in patterns suggesting communication between multiple individuals. And something that made it very clear through investigation and intimidation that we were being monitored closely during our stay in that mountain basin. My name is Irving Walsh. I am 63 years old, and I've worked as a fire lookout operator for the U.S. Forest Service in Oregon for 31 years, spending summer seasons alone in remote mountaintop towers, watching for signs of wildfire across hundreds of thousands of acres of national forest. This happened last August at Huckleberry Mountain Lookout, a tower I'd staffed many times over my career, located at 5,600 feet elevation in the Mount Hood National Forest. The lookout is accessible only by a rough four-wheel drive road, and during my 6-week rotation, I am completely alone, with supplies dropped off at the start of the season, and communication limited to radio contact with district offices. I'd been at Huckleberry for 4 weeks, well into my rotation. The work is solitary, but I am comfortable with isolation, having spent literally years of my life alone in various lookouts. Days are spent scanning the horizon with binoculars, monitoring weather, and documenting any smoke or unusual activity. Around the end of week 4, I started noticing things that seemed unusual. Small items in my tower would be moved when I was certain I'd left them in specific locations. My binoculars shifted from one window to another. My logbook moved from the desk to a shelf. Nothing dramatic, and I initially attributed it to my own forgetfulness after weeks of solitary routine. But the incidents became more frequent and harder to dismiss. One morning, I found my radio, which I always kept on the desk, placed carefully on the catwalk outside the tower. Another day, my food supplies were rearranged in the storage area. Items moved from their usual places and organized in a different pattern. Around the start of week 5, I was woken at night by sounds on the catwalk, the metal walkway that circles the tower about 40 feet off the ground. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and rhythmic, walking around the outside of the tower. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the windows, scanning the catwalk. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the footsteps, completing a circuit around the tower before stopping. This happened several more times over the following week. Always at night, always the same pattern of footsteps circling the tower. I never saw what was making them, though I tried repeatedly, staying awake and watching. Then one night, around 3 a.m., I heard something different. Tapping on the tower windows, deliberate taps that moved from window to window in sequence, as if something was walking around the catwalk and tapping each window as it passed. The tapping was too high to be done by a person standing on the catwalk. The windows are about 7 feet from the catwalk floor, and the tapping was at the top of the glass, suggesting something at least 8 or 9 feet tall. I radioed the district office the next morning and reported that I was experiencing what I thought might be a large animal, possibly a bear, accessing the tower catwalk and causing problems. I requested they send someone up to investigate or relieve me early from my rotation. They sent a forest technician up the next day. He inspected the tower and found something that disturbed both of us. Handprints on the outside of the windows, large prints that showed in the condensation, and dust on the glass. The prints were enormous, showing 4 fingers and a thumb, each digit much larger than human. The prints were at the top of the windows, 7 to 8 feet from the catwalk surface, confirming something very tall had been touching the glass. The technician photographed the prints and told me I could end my rotation early if I wanted, that they'd find someone else to finish the season. But I have over 3 decades of lookout experience, and I wasn't going to abandon my post because of something I didn't understand. I stayed the remaining 2 weeks of my rotation. The incidents continued, though nothing escalated beyond the movements and sounds and occasional window tapping. I documented everything carefully in my logbook, including dates, times, and descriptions of each occurrence. When my rotation ended and I was relieved, I filed a detailed report with the Forest Service describing all the incidents, and including copies of my logbook entries and the photographs of the handprints. The official response was that I'd probably had a bear accessing the tower, even though bears don't leave handprints like what was photographed and can't tap on windows 8 feet above the catwalk surface. But I talked to other fire lookout operators who work Oregon and Washington Cascades, people I've known for decades in this profession. Several admitted privately they'd had strange experiences at remote lookouts. Items being moved, sounds on the catwalks at night, the sense of being watched, signs of something investigating the towers when the operators were inside. One operator with over 25 years' experience told me about staffing a lookout in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. He had experiences almost identical to mine. Items moved, footsteps on the catwalk, window tapping. He found large handprints on his windows too. He finished his rotation but never went back to that particular lookout. The indigenous peoples of Oregon, including the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, whose territory includes parts of the Cascade Range, have traditional knowledge about forest beings who are curious about human structures and activities. According to their teachings, these beings sometimes investigate lookout towers and other isolated human installations, not necessarily with hostile intent, but with what seems like curiosity about human presence in their forest domain. I continue working fire lookouts because it is meaningful work, and I've dedicated my career to it. I staffed Huckleberry Mountain again the following summer. The incidents happened again, following the same pattern, though I was more prepared mentally for them. I've learned to coexist with whatever visits my tower, understanding that I am a guest in a forest that has permanent residents beyond the wildlife I can identify. Fire lookouts in the Oregon Cascades are some of the most isolated duty stations in the Forest Service, positioned on remote mountaintops where operators spend weeks completely alone, often miles from the nearest road. Perfect locations for encounters with something that is curious about these human outposts in the wilderness. And based on my experiences and the handprints that were photographed and conversations with other lookout operators, something does visit these remote towers. Something large enough to reach windows 8 feet high, something intelligent enough to investigate and manipulate objects, and something that seems to be monitoring these isolated human observers who watch over the forest from their mountaintop perches.